At 9:18 a.m. on Friday, 3 people from my team resigned within 11 minutes of each other. My manager had fired me for not being a team player on Tuesday. By Friday, he finally understood that I had been the team. He thought removing me would make the department easier to control. Instead, he exposed how many client deadlines, internal systems, and exhausted employees I had been quietly holding together. And when his replacement plan collapsed, he made one desperate mistake that gave me the leverage he never saw coming. Every story here is about someone who got underestimated and made them regret it. For 5 years, I was the operations manager for a corporate training company called Hartwell Learning Group. We built compliance programs for hospitals, manufacturing firms, and financial services companies. The work sounded simple from the outside. Create courses, schedule instructors, track completion, send reports. But when a hospital system had 8,000 employees who needed mandatory training before an accreditation review, simple disappeared fast. One missed deadline could trigger penalties. One inaccurate completion report could put a client's certification at risk. One bad rollout could cost us a contract worth millions. My department handled all of it. I managed 14 people across client operations, course scheduling, instructor coordination, reporting, and implementation support. Officially, I was operations manager. Unofficially, I was the person people called when a project had gone sideways and nobody wanted to explain why. I knew which clients needed weekly reassurance. I knew which account executives made promises the delivery team could not keep. I knew how to turn a chaotic request at 4:47 p.m. into a workable plan by 8 a.m. the next morning. And I knew my team well enough to recognize when they were reaching the point where good employees stop being tired and start being done. My manager, Richard Vale, did not notice things like that. Richard had been hired as director of delivery 18 months earlier. He came from a consulting firm where, according to him, everyone worked at a higher strategic altitude. He used that phrase constantly. Higher strategic altitude. Whenever someone explained an operational problem, Richard would lean back, fold his arms, and say, "Let's not get trapped in the weeds." The weeds in Richard's world included staffing levels, client requirements, contract deadlines, system limitations, and whether the people doing the work had enough hours left in the day to do it correctly. He loved high-level ideas. He hated details. And he especially hated when details proved that one of his ideas was impossible. At first, I protected my team from him. I translated his vague promises into real plans. I stayed late to correct timelines he had promised to clients without checking with us. I softened his emails before they reached employees. I made him look organized. That was my mistake. Because eventually, Richard started believing he was organized. Then, on a Tuesday at 3:42 p.m., he called me into a meeting with human resources. He had a folder in front of him. A thin folder. The kind people use when they want a decision to look more substantial than it is. He told me I was being terminated for not being a team player. I asked what that meant. Richard smiled. Not warmly. The way someone smiles when they think they have already won. "It means you have created resistance," he said. "You challenge direction. You make the team anxious. You don't adapt." I looked at him, then at the HR representative, then back at Richard. Because the truth was simpler. I had told him we could not launch 3 major client programs on the same Monday with half the staff he had approved. I had refused to tell clients their deadlines were safe when the work was not staffed. And I had put those concerns in writing. Richard had not fired me because I was not a team player. He fired me because I had stopped covering for him. But Richard did not know one thing. Before he walked me out, I had already spent 3 weeks helping my team prepare for the exact kind of collapse he was about to create. I had not told anyone to quit. I had not encouraged a rebellion. I had done something much quieter than that. I made sure every person on my team understood their workload, their job description, their approved hours, and exactly which promises Richard had made without their consent. He thought he was removing the problem. He had no idea he was removing the only person keeping 14 people from seeing the truth at once. Richard announced my termination at 4:15 p.m. He did not use the word fired. He said I had departed to pursue other opportunities. That was his first visible mistake. Because people notice when someone leaves suddenly. Especially when that person had been on every major client call, approved every project plan, and spent the previous week reminding everyone about deadlines nobody else seemed to understand. My team received Richard's announcement in a short email. Effective immediately, Melissa is no longer with Hartwell Learning Group. The delivery team will continue moving forward under updated leadership. Updated leadership. No explanation. No transition plan. No mention of who had assumed my responsibilities. At 4:22 p.m., my senior coordinator, Tasha, called my personal phone. I had just reached the parking garage. "Did they fire you?" she asked. I did not want to put her in a difficult position. So I answered carefully. "I'm no longer employed there." She was quiet for 2 seconds. Then she said, "Richard is telling people you left because you couldn't handle the pace." I stopped walking. Not because I was shocked. Because it was so predictable. When Richard made a bad decision, he needed a story that made the consequences look like someone else's weakness. "He can say what he wants," I said. "But that's not true." "I know. What are we supposed to do?" That question mattered. Not because I wanted them to quit. I did not. I wanted them to protect themselves. So I said, "Do your jobs within your actual responsibilities. Keep communication in writing. Do not take ownership of work you are not authorized or resourced to complete. And do not promise clients anything Richard has not put in a written plan." Tasha took a breath. "You planned for this." "I planned for confusion," I said. "Those are not the same thing." But they became the same thing quickly. The next morning, Richard held an emergency team meeting at 8:30 a.m. He was 20 minutes late. That was classic Richard. He loved demanding urgency from other people while treating time like something that only applied below his title. When he finally joined the call, he sounded upbeat. Too upbeat. "Change creates opportunity," he said. "This is a chance for everyone to stretch." No one spoke. Then he announced the new structure. Instead of replacing me, he was splitting my work across 4 people. Tasha would manage client implementation. Marcus would take over instructor scheduling. Elena would handle reporting and data compliance. And a newer employee named Kyle would oversee workflow coordination. Kyle had been with the company for 4 months. He was smart. He was kind. He had never managed a major client launch. But Richard had chosen him because Kyle nodded during meetings. Richard called that leadership potential. The problem was that he had divided my title. He had not divided my authority. All major staffing approvals still required Richard. All client scope changes still went through Richard. All budget exceptions still required Richard. And Richard was rarely available when anyone needed an answer. By 10:15 a.m., the cracks had already started. One of our largest clients, a hospital network called North River Health, had a compliance training launch scheduled for the following Monday. The contract was worth $8.4 million annually. The launch involved 6,700 employees across 5 hospitals. Every employee had to complete 3 training modules before the end of the quarter. North River's accreditation review was 6 weeks away. The program had been planned for months. But only because I had pushed back on the original timeline. Richard had wanted to launch it 3 weeks earlier. I had told him the data feeds were incomplete, the instructor schedule was short, and the client's employee roster contained hundreds of duplicate records. He had called me risk-averse. Then I had sent him a revised plan with every risk item documented. He approved it because there was no other option. Now that I was gone, Richard had decided the careful plan was too slow. At 10:22 a.m., he emailed the client. "Great news. We are accelerating the North River rollout to ensure all locations are live ahead of schedule." He copied the CEO. He copied sales. He copied the entire client implementation group. And he did not copy Tasha. Tasha found out because a North River administrator forwarded the message and asked, "Can you confirm the revised launch schedule?" Tasha came to Richard's office. I know this because she told me later exactly how it happened. She asked him whether he had approved additional staffing. He said no. She asked whether the data validation work was complete. He said, "We'll clean that up as we go." She asked whether the instructors were available for the revised dates. Richard looked annoyed. Then he said the sentence that would become a pattern. Melissa trained you all to think every problem needs a committee. Tasha did not argue. She went back to her desk. Then she sent a clear email to Richard, Marcus, Elena, Kyle, and Human Resources. Please confirm the staffing plan, validated roster status, instructor availability, and written approval authority for the accelerated North River launch. Current resources are not sufficient to support the revised schedule without removing staff from other contracted commitments. Richard replied 9 minutes later. Proceed. We need solutions, not obstacles. That was his first written mistake. Because proceed is a very different word from please explore options. It meant he had been warned. It meant he had chosen the risk. And it meant the people now expected to deliver the work had a record. By noon, Marcus had identified the first problem. North River needed 42 live virtual sessions in the first 10 business days. The instructor's schedule only had coverage for 28. The remaining 14 sessions would require either overtime, outside contractors, or cancellation of sessions promised to 2 other clients. Richard chose none of those. He told Marcus to make the calendar work. Marcus wrote back, "Please clarify whether I am authorized to cancel committed sessions for other clients or approve external instructor costs." Richard did not answer. At 1:47 p.m., Marcus sent the question again. Still no answer. At 3:03 p.m., North River asked for the final launch roster. Elena could not provide it because 617 employee records still had duplicate IDs or missing location assignments. She emailed Richard. "Do you want us to delay launch communications until the roster is validated?" Richard replied, "No. Send what we have." They need confidence. Confidence. That word appeared in Richard's emails whenever he wanted something to sound more complete than it was. Elena did not send the incomplete roster. Instead, she forwarded the instruction to legal and compliance. Not as a complaint, as a question. Please confirm whether it is appropriate to provide a client with an unvalidated employee training roster that will be used for accreditation-related completion reporting. That was the first satisfying turn. Because Richard had spent months telling people to take ownership. Now they were. They were taking ownership of their own professional responsibilities instead of taking ownership of his shortcuts. And that made him nervous. At 4:40 p.m., Richard called a meeting. He told the team they were being overly cautious. He said morale had dropped since my departure because people were clinging to old ways. He said he needed them to demonstrate commitment to the bigger picture. Then Tasha asked him one question. What is the bigger picture if we fail the contract requirements? No one spoke. Richard blinked. Then he gave the answer he always gave when a real question appeared. We can discuss that offline. But the question stayed in the room. If you've ever been underestimated at work, you already know where this is going. Subscribe, because the ending is better than you think. The next morning, North River's implementation director requested a status call. Richard joined 5 minutes late. Tasha, Marcus, Elena, Kyle, legal, and compliance were already there. North River asked whether the accelerated launch could be supported with confirmed instructors and validated employee records. Richard started with his polished version. We're in excellent shape. The team has been working through final refinements. Then North River's director asked Tasha directly, "Is that accurate?" Tasha did not embarrass him. She did something worse. She was honest. "We have an achievable plan," she said. "But the accelerated date requires staffing and data validations that are still pending approval." Richard shifted in his chair. North River asked, "What approvals?" Tasha looked at the list. Additional instructor capacity, overtime authorization, final roster verification, and confirmation of whether existing client commitments may be rescheduled. There it was. Not emotion. Not rebellion. A list. Richard said, "Those are routine operational details." North River's director replied, "They are not routine to us. This training is tied to our accreditation schedule." The call ended with North River requesting a revised implementation plan by 5 p.m. Richard immediately blamed the team. He sent a message in the department chat. "We need to stop airing internal concerns in front of clients. This is exactly the lack of teamwork I've been addressing." Tasha screenshot the message. Then she saved it. By the end of that day, 3 people had updated their resumes. I did not know that yet. But Richard did. He had started receiving questions that no manager wants to answer. What is my role now? Who approves overtime? Can I be held responsible for missed deadlines without authority? Why are we being told to send incomplete records? He thought these questions were insubordination. They were not. They were what happens when employees realize that being a team player has become code for accepting risks on behalf of someone who will not accept responsibility. Monday came. The accelerated North River launch began. It did not go well. At 8:02 a.m., the first instructor logged into a session with 143 employees assigned. Only 91 could access the platform. The remaining 52 had duplicate login credentials. At 8:16 a.m., a second session failed because the course content had been assigned to the wrong employee group. At 8:31 a.m., North River's site administrator in Columbus called because an entire unit of clinical staff had received no training invitation at all. By 9 a.m., the support inbox had 187 unread tickets. Kyle tried to triage them. But Kyle had never been trained on the escalation map. Richard had told him the process map was too granular. So Kyle routed dozens of client questions to the wrong team. Marcus was trying to reshuffle instructors while responding to a request from another client whose sessions had been canceled without approval. Elena was rebuilding the roster manually. Tasha was on a call with North River, trying to prevent panic. And Richard was in a leadership meeting with the CEO. That was the moment the team began to understand they had been left alone. At 10:11 a.m., Tasha called Richard. No answer. At 10:19 a.m., she sent an urgent email. No answer. At 10:37 a.m., she messaged the CEO's executive assistant and asked for 10 minutes of Richard's time. At 10:42 a.m., Richard finally responded. Use your judgment. I cannot be pulled into every operational issue. Use your judgment. The same judgment he had criticized as resistance 3 days earlier. Tasha read the message to the team. Then she said, okay, everyone document your decisions. We are no longer operating on verbal direction. That changed the entire department. Every unresolved issue became an email. Every missing approval became a written request. Every rejected request became a record. And Richard, who had spent his career surviving through vague language, suddenly had nowhere to hide. At 12:08 p.m., North River requested an emergency executive review. The client had already counted 463 employees with access failures. They wanted to know whether Hartwell could complete the rollout before the accreditation deadline. Richard answered the call alone. He told the client the failures were isolated onboarding issues. That was his second major mistake. Because the client had the same dashboard Elena had. They could see the number rising. By 1:15 p.m., the count was 709. At 2:30 p.m., North River paused the rollout. They did not cancel the contract. Not yet. But they suspended implementation and asked for a formal recovery plan within 24 hours. Richard finally called Tasha into his office. He did not apologize. He asked, "Why didn't you stop this?" Tasha looked at him. "Because you told us to proceed. I told you to use judgment." "We did. We documented that we needed approvals." He stared at her. Then he said, "This is what happens when people care more about being right than being a team." Tasha did not raise her voice. She simply said, "No. This is what happens when a team is expected to work without a manager." That was the point of no return. Richard now had a client crisis, a furious executive team, and employees who had stopped absorbing his mistakes quietly. But he still believed he could fix it by pressuring the people beneath him. At 5:12 p.m., he sent Tasha, Marcus, Elena, and Kyle a message. Everyone is expected to remain available until North River is stabilized. No exceptions. We need people who are committed. That message was not technically illegal, but it was careless. Because 2 people had already worked more than 60 hours the previous week. Because there was no approved overtime plan. Because he was demanding open-ended availability without defining work assignments. And because Tasha had one more document Richard did not know existed. 3 weeks before I was fired, I had submitted a workforce risk memo to Human Resources and the COO. It documented staffing shortages, burnout, unapproved overtime expectations, and the operational risk of launching North River without additional resources. Richard had seen it. He had replied with 6 words. Melissa is overstating routine delivery pressure. That memo was about to become the center of the entire story. But what happened at 9 a.m. the next morning is the part nobody saw coming, and it started with a single email Richard never should have sent. He was trying to force the team to stay quiet and work through the weekend. Instead, he accused them of abandoning the company, copied human resources, and gave them the exact written proof that turned 3 resignations into a formal investigation. At 8:54 a.m. Tuesday, Richard sent an email to the entire delivery department. The subject line was, "Immediate expectations for team commitment." He copied human resources. He copied the COO. And he copied the CEO. The email said that recent operational problems had been made worse by a lack of shared accountability. Then Richard wrote that employees who were unwilling to support critical client needs outside normal hours should reconsider whether they were aligned with Hartwell's values. He did not name anyone. He did not have to. Everyone knew who the message was for. Tasha, Marcus, Elena, Kyle, and every other person who had spent the last week doing work Richard had not planned, approved, or understood. At 9:03 a.m., Tasha replied. Not emotionally. Not defensively. She attached the staffing requests, the unanswered approval emails, the work logs, the client escalation notes, and the workforce risk memo I had written 3 weeks earlier. Then she wrote one paragraph. On behalf of the implementation team, we have repeatedly requested resources, approval authority, and a compliant recovery plan. We remain committed to our client obligations. However, we cannot accept responsibility for decisions made without our authority, staffing, or documented approval. She copied the same people Richard had copied. Human resources. The COO. The CEO. Richard. Then Marcus replied. He attached a calendar showing he had worked 67 hours the previous week. He included the messages where Richard had told him to make the calendar work without approving contractor costs or overtime. Then Elena replied. She attached the instruction telling her to send an incomplete roster to North River. And she included the compliance question that had never been answered. By 9:18 a.m., the email thread had become something Richard could not control. Not gossip. Not frustration. Evidence. At 9:22 a.m., the COO scheduled an emergency meeting for 10 a.m. Richard was told not to contact the North River client until further notice. That was the first time he sounded frightened. He called Tasha. She did not answer. He called Marcus. No answer. He called Elena. No answer. Then he called me. I was at home, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee I had actually had time to drink while it was hot. I watched his name ring across my phone. Once. Twice. 3 times. I did not answer. I had no obligation to solve a crisis for a company that had fired me a week earlier. But then at 9:31 a.m., the CEO called. I answered her. Melissa, she said, I know you are no longer with Hartwell, but I need to ask whether you would be willing to join a call as an external consultant. She was careful, professional. She understood the difference between asking and demanding. What is the scope? I asked. North River is considering termination. We need an honest assessment of whether the rollout can be recovered. I thought about the team. About Tasha's calm voice. About Marcus trying to fix schedules without authority. About Elena being told to send information she knew was not ready. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Will the team have documented authority to make the operational decisions they are being held responsible for? The COO paused. Yes, she said. They will. And Richard. He has been removed from the client response pending review. That was enough. I agreed to join the 10 a.m. call. When I logged in, the room was full. The CEO, the COO, Human Resources, Legal, Compliance, Richard, Tasha, Marcus, Elena, Kyle, and 2 representatives from North River. Richard looked directly at me. His expression was tight. He was angry that I was there. But underneath the anger was something else. He knew he needed me. The North River implementation director spoke first. We need to understand whether Hartwell has a credible recovery plan. Right now, we have more than 700 employees without access, incomplete reporting, and no confidence that your internal team is aligned. The CEO began with an apology. Then she asked me to explain the situation. I did not attack Richard. I did not tell them he had fired me. I did not need to. I opened the project plan. The rollout failed because the accelerated launch removed the controls designed to protect it, I said. The employee roster was not validated. The instructor schedule was not adequately staffed. The escalation process was changed without training. And the team lacked authority to stop work when risks became clear. The North River director asked, "Can it be fixed?" "Yes," I said. Richard shifted in his chair. I continued. But not by asking the same team to work indefinitely without support. We need a 72-hour recovery plan, full roster validation, dedicated technical support, approved overtime, contracted instructor capacity, and a single operational decision-maker with authority in writing. The COO asked, "Who should lead that?" The room went quiet. Then Tasha spoke. "Melissa should." I looked at her. She did not smile. She just nodded once. That meant more to me than any executive compliment ever could. The COO turned to me. "Would you lead it?" I took a breath. "I will lead the recovery as an external consultant," I said. "But I will not return under Richard. And the current team needs formal protection from retaliation for raising documented risks." Human Resources spoke immediately. "That can be arranged." Richard finally interrupted. "This is becoming a personal issue." I looked at him. "No," I said. "It became an operational issue when North River paused the rollout. The documentation is simply clear." The North River director did not say anything. But she was looking at Richard now. Not at me. At him. That mattered. Because for the first time, the client could see who had been making decisions and who had been trying to prevent the damage. The 72-hour recovery plan began at 11:30 a.m. I did not return to the office. I worked remotely under a consulting agreement that paid more for 3 days than Hartwell had paid me in a month. Not because I demanded revenge. Because emergencies cost money. And because the company had finally learned that competent work has a price. Tasha led client communication. Marcus rebuilt the instructor schedule using approved contractors. Elena validated the roster line by line with North River's data team. Carl handled support ticket routing under a process he could actually follow. For the first time in weeks, everyone had clear responsibilities. For the first time, no one was expected to guess what Richard meant. At 2:16 a.m. Wednesday, we completed the first major recovery milestone. All 6,700 employee records had been validated. At 7:40 a.m., the new access invitations went out. At 11:05 a.m., the first 3 live training sessions ran without a single login failure. At 4:59 p.m., North River agreed to resume the rollout in phases. Not because they had forgotten what happened. Because they could finally see a plan that made sense. Richard was not part of it. By Thursday afternoon, the internal investigation had started. Human Resources interviewed every member of the department. Legal reviewed the email trail. The COO reviewed the workforce risk memo I had submitted before I was fired. And that memo did something important. It proved the staffing crisis was not sudden. It proved Richard had been warned. It proved that when he accused me of not being a team player, he was punishing the person who had put the risks in writing. At 9:18 a.m. Friday, 3 people resigned. Tasha, Marcus, Elena. They did not resign because I asked them to. They resigned because they had spent years giving more than their job required, and the company had only noticed their value when the department broke. Their letters were brief, professional. Each one said some version of the same thing. I am unable to continue in an environment where documented operational concerns are treated as a failure of commitment. Kyle did not resign. Not immediately. He stayed because he was younger and needed the stability. But 2 months later, he joined Tasha at another company. That was not my decision either. It was the result of people seeing clearly what they had been asked to tolerate. Richard was placed on administrative leave that Friday afternoon. He did not get a dramatic exit. No box carried through the lobby. No final announcement. Just a calendar invite, a closed-door meeting, and an automated message 3 days later saying he was no longer with Hartwell Learning Group. The company offered me my old job back. Then they offered a title increase. Then they offered a retention bonus. I declined all three. Not because I was bitter. Because I had learned something during those 3 days. I could lead a team without being trapped inside a company that only valued them after losing them. So I built a small operations consulting practice. Tasha joined me first. Then Marcus. Then Elena. Within 8 months, we had 5 clients. One of them was North River. They did not hire Hartwell for the next phase of their training program. They hired us. Their contract with my new firm was worth $1.2 million in the first year. Not $8.4 million. Not the whole thing. But it was enough. Enough to pay people fairly. Enough to build schedules that did not require emergencies to be treated like a culture. Enough to prove that real teamwork is not one person sacrificing themselves while someone else takes credit for surviving. And 6 months after I was fired for not being a team player, I received an email from the COO. She wrote, "You were right about the staffing model." I read it once. Then I archived it. Because being right was never the goal. The goal was to stop carrying an entire department on my back while being told I was the problem for asking for help. If that hit you the way it hit me, hit subscribe. This channel is proof that being underestimated is a warning, not a weakness. Here is the lesson. Be a team player should never mean accept unlimited responsibility with no authority, no resources, and no protection. Know your rights. Know your job description. Know which decisions you are authorized to make and which risks you should never quietly absorb for someone else. If leadership gives you an impossible deadline, ask for priorities in writing. If they remove resources, ask what work should be delayed. If they tell you to proceed despite a documented risk, confirm the instruction by email. That is not disloyal. That is professional. You do not need to threaten anyone. You do not need to argue in every meeting. But you do need to stop becoming the invisible cushion between bad leadership and real consequences. People like Richard rely on ambiguity. They say, use your judgment, after refusing to give direction. They say, be flexible, when they mean, take the blame later. They say, teamwork, when they mean, work harder so I do not have to explain my decisions. Do not give them a vague story to rewrite. Give them facts, dates, staffing numbers, unanswered requests, clear boundaries. A strong team is not a group of people who endure anything. It is a group of people who know what they are responsible for, support each other honestly, and refuse to let one person's ego become everyone else's emergency. The next story started with a password nobody thought to ask about. I was the only person who knew how to access a system that processed every client payment in the company, but management treated it like a minor detail right up until they pushed me out. Then, at 7:06 a.m. on payroll day, they discovered the system was locked, the backups were incomplete, and the person they had ignored was the only one who understood why. Subscribe so you don't miss what happened when nobody asked why I was the only one who knew the password.